The monitor shrieked, a flatline slicing through the tense silence of St. Jude's ICU. Mrs. Anya Sharma, fragile as spun glass after her stroke, was slipping away. Chief Neurosurgeon Dr. Alarico Ruiz barked orders, his face a mask of frustration, as the senior staff scrambled, every conventional intervention failing. Rookie nurse Amara Oladele, usually a phantom in the background, felt a primal hum in her fingertips. Her village upbringing, those whispered remedies, screamed at her. Against every fiber of hierarchy, ignoring Dr. Ruiz's furious glare, she moved. Her hand, guided by instinct, gently but firmly repositioned Mrs. Sharma's head, a minute adjustment to the angle of the neck and jaw. A gasp from a resident. The flatline wavered, a faint, rhythmic pulse flickering back on screen. Ruiz, crimson with rage, spun on her. "What in God's name do you think you're doing, Nurse Oladele?" His words were a public humiliation, but in Amara's heart, a quiet knowing bloomed. She knew, with a certainty that transcended dogma, that this was just the beginning. The relief in Mrs. Sharma's vitals was undeniable, a ghost of a pulse now strong enough to register, her struggling breaths finding a steadier rhythm. But for Dr. Alarico Ruiz, the temporary reprieve was overshadowed by a primal fury. He didn't see a life saved, he saw a rookie nurse, barely out of orientation, dismantling his carefully constructed hierarchy in front of his entire team. "Get her out of my ICU," Ruiz hissed, his voice trembling with suppressed rage, his eyes burning into Amara. "Now!" Amara felt the weight of every gaze, 100 years of St. Jude's rigid protocols pressing down on her. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of monitors that now, paradoxically, sang a tune of stability. She was escorted, not gently, to the gleaming, sterile office of Dr. Mbatha, head of neurology, a woman whose reputation for scientific precision and unforgiving intellect preceded her. Mbatha sat behind a minimalist glass desk, her posture impeccable, her eyes like chips of obsidian. Ruiz joined her, slamming the door behind him. "Nurse Oladele," Mbatha began, her voice a cool, dangerous bomb. "Dr. Ruiz tells me you took it upon yourself to perform an unsanctioned, medically baseless intervention on a critical patient, Mrs. Sharma. Is this correct?" Amara swallowed, her throat dry. The patient was coding, Dr. Mbatha. Every conventional method was failing. I knew, that a small adjustment could relieve cranial pressure, even just momentarily. She looked from Mbatha's unyielding stare to Ruiz's incredulous face. "In my village, we understand subtle pressure points, how they relate to flow. It's an ancient practice for swelling, for blockages." Mbatha scoffed, a soft, dismissive sound that cut deeper than any shout. "In your village, Nurse Oladele, perhaps. Here, at St. Jude's, we operate on peer-reviewed science, on evidence, on protocols designed to save lives, not endanger them with folklore." She leaned forward, her gaze intensifying. "You jeopardized Mrs. Sharma's recovery, not to mention your entire career, with this impulse. But she improved." Amara pleaded, her voice cracking with the injustice of it. Her vitals stabilized. She was going to die. She wanted to explain the subtle shift she'd felt in Mrs. Sharma's neck, the almost imperceptible release, but the words felt crude, inadequate, against their wall of scientific dogma. Ruiz interjected, his voice tight. "Improvement, Nurse Oladele, is a complex medical phenomenon. Attributing it to some tribal superstition is not only unprofessional, it's dangerous. We cannot have staff members taking matters into their own untrained hands, no matter how desperate the situation. This hospital demands order, precision, science." His emphasis on the last word was a hammer blow. Amara felt a cold dread spread through her. They weren't just criticizing her, they were dismantling her belief system, her very core. She knew, with every fiber of her being, that what she did was right, that it had helped. But in this temple of modern medicine, her knowledge was not just wrong, it was an offense. The tension in the room thickened, a suffocating shroud, as the two senior doctors prepared to deliver their verdict. "Nurse Oladele, your services are no longer required." Mbatha's words, sharp and final, cut through the tension. Ruiz nodded grimly, his expression a stone wall. Amara felt a cold emptiness bloom in her chest, replacing the earlier dread. She nodded once, numbly, and walked out, leaving behind the sterile perfection of St. Jude's, her heart aching with a mix of injustice and a profound sense of loss. The hospital, once a sanctuary for her hidden gifts, had become a tomb for her aspirations. The next 48 hours were a blur of defeated silence at home, punctuated only by the muffled, increasingly frantic news reports. St. Jude's, usually a beacon of medical triumph, was now a vortex of whispered anxieties, stories of its new star patient dominating every broadcast. The city held its breath. It began with a subtle hum, then a growing tremor that vibrated through the city's airwaves. President Javier Salazar, a man whose steady hand had guided the nation through turbulent times, had collapsed. A severe subarachnoid hemorrhage, a brain aneurysm rupture, had plunged him into critical condition. The very best were summoned, and St. Jude's transformed into a besieged fortress, news vans swarming its perimeter, the world holding its breath. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating, thick with unspoken panic. Dr. Ruiz, his usual stoicism replaced by a visible tremor in his hands, barked orders in the neurosurgical suite. Dr. Mbatha, her intimidating composure cracking at the edges, reviewed scans with furious intensity. Conventional interventions, shunts, medications, even the most aggressive surgical preparations, were deployed with practiced, desperate haste. Yet, the president's intracranial pressure, a relentless, invisible enemy, climbed higher, defiant. Each spike on the monitor was a direct assault on their confidence, a mocking echo of the science they so fiercely upheld. "The ICP is still rising," a monitor technician called out, her voice barely a whisper above the alarms. "We're losing him, doctor." Ruiz wiped sweat from his brow. His eyes, usually sharp and decisive, now darted across the monitors, betraying a rising panic that threatened to overwhelm his professional veneer. "Increase mannitol. Prepare for decompressive craniectomy, if it comes to that." The words were heavy with the ultimate admission that their best efforts were proving insufficient. Mbatha slammed her fist softly on the console, a rare display of raw frustration. "It's not responding, Alarico. Nothing is responding. We've exhausted every protocol. Every single one." Her voice was laced with a palpable fear that echoed the collective dread in the room. The president's vitals flickered, a grim dance on the edge of the abyss. Every breath he took seemed shallower, every beat of his heart more tenuous. The rigid adherence to science that had defined their careers, that had dismissed Amara's folklore with such conviction, was now failing them spectacularly. Their critical error wasn't a single misplaced incision, but the unwavering belief that their established knowledge held all the answers, a belief that prevented them from seeing beyond the textbook. A chilling silence descended, broken only by the insistent, accelerating beeps of the monitors, each sound a hammer blow against their dwindling hope. The president's life, and perhaps the stability of the entire nation, hung by a thread, fraying rapidly in the sterile, desperate confines of St. Jude's. The doctors, once so confident, now stood paralyzed, their faces etched with a profound, terrifying helplessness. The air crackled with unspoken terror, a silent scream of impending loss. Amara's struggle, being an underdog with unique wisdom, is a feeling many of us know well, the frustration of being overlooked despite our unique contributions. If her fight for validation resonates with you, we invite you to become part of our story, and ours. Please, subscribe to our channel. By joining our global community, you help us bring more compelling, better produced narratives to life. Your support means the world to us and allows us to continue celebrating courage and hidden brilliance. Thank you for being here, we'd love for you to join our family. The sterile air of St. Jude's felt heavier than Amara remembered, a suffocating blanket woven from panic and despair. Each step down the gleaming corridor was a battle against the gnawing fear in her gut. She could feel the stairs, a mixture of disbelief and frantic hope, boring into her back. Dr. Ruiz, his face a mask of desperate exhaustion, offered a terse nod. Dr. Mbatha, her usual intimidating composure shattered, merely looked away, unable to meet Amara's eyes. The air crackled with unspoken skepticism, the lingering doubt in their minds about the village nurse they had dismissed. Amara felt like an imposter, her hands clammy, her heart a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. Just as she reached the doors of the ICU, the shrill, piercing wail of a flatlining monitor ripped through the tense silence. "He's coding," a voice screamed, thick with terror. The doors burst open, revealing a maelstrom of frantic activity. Nurses and doctors swarmed President Salazar's bed, a desperate ballet of compressions and defibrillator paddles. Ruiz barked orders, his voice raw, but his eyes, when they flickered to Amara, held a terrifying emptiness. Mbatha stood frozen, her scientific certitude crumbling before the brutal reality of death. Fear, cold and sharp, seized Amara. This wasn't a bruised villager or a child with a fever. This was the president, a man whose life held the weight of a nation, and she was just Amara, the rookie, the one who broke rules. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to disappear back into the anonymity from which she'd been dragged. Her village elders had taught her respect for life, but also respect for authority, for the established way. What she knew was an outlier, a whisper against the roar of modern medicine. But then, she saw him. President Salazar's face, pale and still, devoid of the vibrant life that had animated it just days before. And in that moment, something shifted within Amara. The fear didn't vanish, but it was eclipsed by a surge of pure, unadulterated resolve. It wasn't about protocol, or dogma, or even her own reputation anymore. It was about a life, a human being slipping away. Her hands, which had been trembling just moments before, stilled. A deep, quiet strength bloomed in her chest, pushing back the terror. She knew what needed to be done, a precise, almost forgotten technique that pulsed in her memory, passed down through generations. It was a leap of faith, a defiance of everything she had been taught in St. Jude's, a willingness to risk not just her career, but the very trust they had begrudgingly placed in her. Taking a steadying breath, Amara stepped forward, her gaze locked on the dying president, her voice clear and resonant amidst the chaos. "Move aside," she commanded, the unexpected authority in her tone cutting through the pandemonium. "Let me try." Her transformation from terrified rookie to resolute healer was complete. "Move aside," Amara's voice, though quiet, was infused with an unexpected steel that cut through the cacophony of alarms and frantic commands. The medical team, stunned by her sudden authority, faltered. Dr. Ruiz and Dr. Mbatha exchanged a glance, a mix of disbelief and reluctant, desperate hope warring in their eyes. They had exhausted everything. What more did they have to lose? A silent, agonizing second stretched, then Ruiz, his face a mask of defeat, gave a barely perceptible nod. The staff parted, creating a small, impossibly tense clearing around the president's bed. Amara stepped forward, her focus absolute. "It's an ancient technique," she explained, her gaze never leaving President Salazar's face, a manual pressure application. "It's not conventional. It's been called folklore." She didn't ask for permission again, merely stated her intent, her hands already reaching. Ruiz's jaw tightened, every fiber of his scientific training screaming against this absurdity, but the monitor's flatlining dance was a more potent argument. Mbatha's lips thinned, contempt battling the icy grip of terror. This was madness. Yet, neither of them moved to stop her. With a calm that defied the chaos engulfing them, Amara's hands, steady as ancient stone, moved to President Salazar's head. Her fingers, long and nimble, didn't press with brute force, but with a nuanced, almost intuitive precision. They settled gently, reverently, on a specific point just above the president's temple, a subtle indentation only she seemed to perceive. It wasn't a massage, nor a frantic attempt to staunch a wound. It was a focused, almost meditative application of pressure, so subtle it was barely visible, yet radiating an undeniable intensity. Ruiz, the chief neurosurgeon, felt a cold dread intertwined with a flicker of unwilling fascination. His brain, accustomed to detailed anatomical maps and high-tech diagnostics, struggled to reconcile the scene. He knew every artery, every nerve pathway in that skull. What was she doing? He leaned closer, his professional skepticism warring with the raw terror of losing the president. He watched, transfixed, as Amara's brow furrowed slightly, her entire being pouring into her fingertips. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. Just profound, quiet purpose. Mbatha, typically composed, felt a bead of sweat trickle down her temple. Every medical instinct screamed that this was charlatanism, a desperate folly that would end in disaster. She wanted to intervene, to yell, to pull Amara away. But the sheer conviction radiating from the young nurse, the eerie quiet that had fallen over the room as she worked, held her captive. Amara's gaze, though fixed on the president, seemed to pierce through the layers of their dogma, challenging everything Mbatha believed to be true. The air thrummed with a tension so thick it was suffocating, the only sound the rhythmic, desperate beeping of the life support machines, marking each agonizing second. They watched, disbelieving, horrified, yet utterly unable to look away. Amara's fingers, impossibly light yet imbued with an ancient strength, maintained their delicate pressure. Her eyes, usually so quick to shy away, were now fiercely concentrated, seeing beyond skin and bone, into the very core of the man fighting for his life. A silent incantation seemed to ripple from her, not of words, but of profound understanding. The air, which moments ago had crackled with the static electricity of impending doom, now seemed to soften, almost to hum with a nascent energy. She held her breath, holding the president's life in her hands, her own pulse mirroring the frantic, irregular rhythm on the monitor. Then, imperceptibly at first, a single, tiny shift. A flicker on the cardiac monitor. A faint, almost hesitant alteration in the pattern of the brain pressure readings. Dr. Ruiz, his face a mask of horrified anticipation, leaned in closer, his gaze locked on the fluctuating numbers. His breath hitched. It was too soon, too impossible. Yet, the persistent, desperate beeping was no longer quite so erratic. The chaotic dance of the line on the monitor began to smooth, a hesitant rhythm asserting itself, like a fractured melody slowly finding its tune. Mbatha, who had been bracing herself for the ultimate collapse, felt a jolt. Her medical brain, honed by decades of empirical data, screamed denial. But her eyes, wide and disbelieving, saw it. The numbers were climbing, not plummeting. The frantic, warning alarms of the life support machines began to quiet, one by one, their shrill cries replaced by a steady, almost serene hum. The cacophony of fear that had dominated the room gave way to an astonishing, profound silence, broken only by the steady, measured beat of President Salazar's heart. Amara slowly, gently, withdrew her hand. Exhaustion, profound and absolute, washed over her, making her legs tremble. But beneath it, a quiet, soaring triumph. She looked up, her gaze meeting Ruiz's. His eyes, usually sharp and critical, were now wide with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher, a blend of shock, disbelief, and something akin to awe. His mouth was slightly agape, the usual rigid lines of his jaw softened by a nascent wonder. Mbatha moved first. She didn't speak, couldn't. Her hands, which usually flew across keyboards or gestured emphatically, were pressed against her mouth, trembling. Tears, hot and unexpected, pricked at her eyes. The impossible had happened. The president, moments from coding, was stable. The chaotic storm had subsided, leaving behind an unbelievable, miraculous calm. A choked sound escaped Ruiz. It wasn't a word, but a guttural expression of raw, unadulterated relief. The weight of a nation lifted from his shoulders in a single, breath-shattering moment. He simply stared at Amara, a flicker of understanding, perhaps even reverence, dawning in his eyes. The tension that had held every person in that room captive for what felt like an eternity snapped, replaced by a collective, shuddering exhale. A junior resident openly wept, wiping tears from her eyes with the back of her hand. The nurses exchanged wide-eyed, disbelieving glances, their faces reflecting the overwhelming, joyous release of catharsis. Amara had not only saved a life, she had, in that precise, impossible moment, touched something ancient, something beyond science, reminding them all that sometimes, the greatest healing lay in the most unexpected of places. The room still vibrated with the aftershocks of the impossible. Dr. Ruiz, a man whose entire professional life was built on empirical evidence and rigorous scientific method, felt the bedrock beneath him shift. He took a hesitant step toward Amara, his usual imperious posture replaced by a slight stoop, as if the weight of his own sudden humility pressed down on him. His eyes, usually sharp and critical, held a bewildered awe as they met hers. Amara. His voice was barely a whisper, a stark contrast to his usual booming authority. What did you do? He didn't demand an answer, but rather pleaded for understanding. The question hung in the air, echoing the silent query in every pair of exhausted eyes around them. Dr. Mbatha, who had stood frozen, a statue of scientific skepticism, now moved. She approached Amara, not with her usual intimidating stride, but with a cautious, almost reverent curiosity. Her gaze, while still intense, was devoid of judgment, replaced by an intellectual hunger to comprehend the incomprehensible. "Nurse Oladele," she began, her tone surprisingly soft, "this defies every principle I've ever known. And yet, the president lives because of it." Amara, her own adrenaline beginning to recede, felt a profound weariness settle over her. She gently removed her hands from President Salazar's head, flexing her fingers. "It's what I was taught," she said softly, her voice still quiet, almost shy. "From my grandmother. In the village. It's not folklore there, Dr. Ruiz. It's simply knowledge. A way to understand the body's pathways, to coax it back into balance." She wasn't boasting, she was merely stating a fact, a truth as natural to her as breathing, yet alien to this sterile, high-tech world. A murmur rippled through the gathered team. Junior residents, their faces streaked with tears and awe, looked at Amara not as the rookie they once dismissed, but as someone who had tapped into a profound, almost mystical wisdom. The senior nurses, who had witnessed countless miracles and tragedies, now saw a different kind of miracle, one born not of advanced technology, but of ancient hands and innate understanding. They exchanged knowing glances, a silent recognition of the extraordinary woman in their midst. Dr. Ruiz finally found his voice, a tremor running through it. "Knowledge. Amara, you saved him. You saved the president. You saved us all." He extended a hand, not for a handshake, but to gently touch her arm, a gesture of profound respect and apology. I was wrong. We were all wrong." The admission, from the notoriously unyielding chief neurosurgeon, was a seismic event in itself. It wasn't just an apology, it was a surrender of dogma, a public acknowledgement that his rigid world had been expanded, irrevocably. Dr. Mbatha, her scientific mind racing, peered at Amara, a dawning realization in her eyes. "You said village healing. You're not just a nurse, are you? This isn't just a technique you learned in nursing school." She paused, then, a rare, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "This is who you are." Amara looked around at the faces, no longer filled with skepticism or disdain, but with wonder, respect, and a nascent curiosity. She hadn't sought validation, only to help. Yet, in that moment, she felt seen, truly seen, for the first time in St. Jude's. It was a profound emotional affirmation, more powerful than any applause or award. Her quiet humility, her unassuming strength, shone through, solidifying her place not just as a competent nurse, but as a genuine healer, whose wisdom bridged worlds. The scientific giants, humbled and transformed, stood before her, ready to listen. The air in the ER, still thick with the lingering scent of antiseptic and adrenaline, now hummed with a different energy, one of profound respect and burgeoning hope. Dr. Ruiz, his posture still commanding but stripped of its former inflexibility, turned to Amara. "Nurse Oladele," he began, his voice raspy, "what you have demonstrated, it compels us to reevaluate everything. St. Jude's prides itself on innovation, on saving lives. And you, Amara, have shown us a path we never even conceived." He paused, gathering himself. "We would be not only arrogant but criminally negligent to let your unique abilities leave these walls. We want you back. Not just as a staff nurse, but in a new, specialized role. One that allows you to share your wisdom, to integrate your insights into our practice. A new department, perhaps, dedicated to complementary neurotherapeutics. You would lead it." Dr. Mbatha, usually so guarded, stepped forward, her gaze intense but now entirely devoid of judgment. "Indeed, Amara. My scientific mind demands answers, understanding. What you possess isn't folklore, it's a profound, empirically effective knowledge system that deserves the most rigorous study. I envision a collaborative research initiative, spearheaded by you, to document, analyze, and ultimately, to teach. This is a chance to pioneer a new frontier in medicine, to bridge the gap between ancient wisdom and cutting-edge science." Amara listened, a quiet dignity radiating from her. The thought of returning to St. Jude's, not as an outcast but as a pioneer, was both daunting and deeply fulfilling. This wasn't just a job offer, it was an invitation to embody her true self, to heal on her own terms, within a system that had once scorned her. She saw not just a hospital changing, but a future where compassion and intuition held equal standing with protocols and scans. "President Salazar is stable," the chief of staff interjected softly, "and making a remarkable recovery. He owes you his life, Amara." Amara's gaze met Ruiz's, then Mbatha's. Their transformation was palpable. The rigid chief neurosurgeon now carried an air of humility, his intellectual curiosity reignited beyond established boundaries. The intimidating head of neurology now radiated an eager scientific openness, ready to learn from the inexplicable. They weren't just offering her a position, they were offering her a partnership, a chance to co-create a new paradigm of care. A serene smile touched Amara's lips. "I would be honored," she said, her voice soft but firm, "to help. To heal, in whatever way I can, and to ensure that no patient is ever denied the benefit of every possible path to wellness." And so, Amara Oladele returned to St. Jude's, not merely reinstated, but reborn into a role that celebrated her authentic self. Her intuitive touch, once dismissed as folklore, became the cornerstone of a groundbreaking new approach. Her journey shattered the dogma that had once shackled the hospital, replacing it with an ethos of integrated care, hope, and human growth. It was a powerful testament to the fact that true healing often lay not just in advanced technology, but in the brave heart that dared to listen to an ancient whisper, and in the wisdom that recognized its timeless truth. St. Jude's would never be the same. It had learned that the greatest innovation sometimes came from the most unexpected places, guided by the most humble of hands. Amara's inspiring journey reminds us that true healing often lies in courage, intuition, and the wisdom to challenge dogma. What overlooked wisdom or quiet heroism has inspired you? Share your thoughts below. If this story resonated, please consider subscribing to join our global community. Your support truly helps us create more compelling narratives like this one, celebrating human spirit and breaking barriers. Thank you so much for watching. for being part of our journey, and for valuing the power of storytelling. We deeply appreciate you and look forward to sharing more together.